There are moments in a season when everything feels strangely out of balance, when you look around and wonder how certain players carry a team on their backs while the rest of the league barely notices. The Pro Bowl voting opening on Thursday does exactly that. It throws a spotlight where it wants, not necessarily where it should. And when that light misses someone, you feel the frustration building, as if the whole thing is drifting away from any sense of fairness. But isn't that always the question? Who actually deserves recognition, and who is just riding on reputation? You watch the Dolphins every week, and you feel it. The players who keep the team alive aren't always the ones plastered across national broadcasts. There's always this tension, this quiet demand for justice, even though everyone knows the Pro Bowl has become a popularity contest dressed up like an award ceremony. Yet here we are again, wondering if the people who vote will actually notice what's happening on the field instead of what they've heard for years. So when the conversation comes up about who should represent Miami in the Pro Bowl, the answer isn't complicated. It's the 5 players who have carried this team through stretches where everything seemed to hang by a thread. Players whose seasons don't need hype because the impact is right there, obvious to anyone who actually watches. But will the voters look closely? Or will they fall back on the same familiar names? Let's start with the one who had every reason to fade, but refused to let the season collapse. Jalen Waddle. Ever since Tyreek Hill went down in Week 4 against the Jets, the entire passing game twisted in a way nobody expected. Suddenly Waddle became the lone threat, the receiver every defense tilted toward, the target the quarterback had no choice but to trust. And what did he do with that pressure? He turned it into 722 yards, good enough to put him near the top of the league, not because he's being manufactured into the offense, but because he's earning every inch of space he gets. You watch him run these routes, and there's this sense that he's tired of being labeled as someone who only shines when Hill is next to him. His 13.19 air yards per target isn't accidental. It's a statement. It's him winning downfield while carrying the burden of being the only real receiver available. And if you're wondering how the Dolphins' passing game still breathes at all, the answer is Waddle. The next closest receiver in yardage is Hill, who hasn't played since that same Week 4 moment. Doesn't that say enough? Still, you get this uneasy feeling when you think about the voting. Most of the league's top wideouts this year are in the NFC. Waddle sits high among AFC receivers, 3rd in yards, 11th in catches, and yet you can already imagine the excuses people will come up with to overlook him. How many voters will even realize he's keeping this passing game from collapsing entirely? How many will pretend they're looking at numbers objectively? And then there's Devon Achane, the player who somehow runs with both fury and calm, the one whose growth feels like a turning point for the franchise. If there's anyone who deserves to hear his name called, it's him. Achane has been the Dolphins' anchor in a season where nothing stayed steady. He's 4th in the NFL in rushing yards with 900, trailing only Taylor, Cook, and Gibbs. And while the Dolphins may not have planned for him to lead the team in receptions, the 54 catches and 370 receiving yards aren't accidents. They're proof of how much responsibility he's absorbed. But here's where the frustration creeps in. Achane's improvement isn't about flashy statistics. It's about the subtle things people usually ignore: contact balance, vision, timing, traits he struggled with last year, but now uses to carve out yards no one else saw coming. He's not just faster. He's smarter, more complete, more decisive. And still, a small part of you already knows how this might go. Derrick Henry might get votes because he's Derrick Henry. Someone might glance at Achane's name, shrug, and move on. Is that fair? Not at all. Will it happen anyway? You know the answer. And if you want to talk about impact, Jordan Brooks is right there, quietly erasing mistakes, plugging holes, and keeping the defense from unraveling. He's been the defensive MVP without question. Every week he racks up tackles, not the empty kind, but the ones that actually stop drives. He's leading the league in tackles, ranking high in tackles against the run, stacking up tackles for loss with a consistency that makes you wonder how he's not already a household name. There's something strangely satisfying about watching him clean up chaos, especially after spending the early season behind a young defensive line, still trying to figure itself out. He carried their mistakes on his shoulders, absorbed hits, made stops, and then something shifted. The line got better, And suddenly Brooks wasn't just the last line of defense. He was the one starting the disruption. 11 pressures, 2.5 sacks. Impact, not noise. But again, will voters look past names like Roquan Smith, even though Smith hasn't been healthy all year? Or will they do what they always do and choose familiarity over performance? Then there's Aaron Brewer, one of those players people seldom discuss unless they're doing film breakdowns late at night. Centers rarely get attention, even when they're elite, and Brewer is playing at that level. For 2 seasons, he's been one of the best at his position, using mobility that allows the Dolphins to open up their run game and screen game in creative ways few teams can replicate. This season, he hasn't allowed a single sack and has given up just 10 pressures, numbers that should be impossible to ignore. Yet you already know how this tends to go. Creed Humphrey and Tyler Linderbaum will attract votes because their reputations are louder. Brewer's work, it's quieter but every bit as meaningful. And finally, Patrick Paul, the second-year tackle who wasn't supposed to be the savior of anything. He was supposed to develop slowly, learn behind veterans, grow at his own pace. Instead, he stepped into Terran Armstead's place, a role so heavy most tackles fold under it. Paul didn't. He played every game. He allowed only 2 sacks and 12 pressures despite spending most of his snaps alone on an island with minimal help. Miami often shifts their protection to the right side because of injuries, leaving Paul exposed to some of the best edge rushers in the league. And somehow he holds his ground. When he faced Myles Garrett, he allowed 0 pressures. 0. How many tackles can say that? His run blocking isn't perfect, sure. But even that flaw has context. He's lined up next to a rookie who's still learning. The fact that Paul is even in this position, playing at a Pro Bowl level in his second year, should be enough to put him in the conversation. But name recognition is ruthless, and he doesn't have it yet. So where does that leave us? With 5 players who deserve recognition, far more than the voting system is likely to grant them. 5 players who have dragged this team through injuries, inconsistencies, and chaos, carrying the Dolphins through stretches that could have broken them. 5 players who might be ignored because fans elsewhere don't bother to look closely. The Pro Bowl may not mean what it used to, but for these players, it still matters. It affects contracts. It affects legacy. It affects the way the league views them. And when you watch week after week, you can't help but wonder, will people finally pay attention? Will they see Waddle keeping the passing game alive? A chain evolving into the heart of the offense? Brooks dominating the middle of the field? Brewer anchoring the line with calm efficiency? Paul standing strong as if he were a seasoned veteran? Or will the voting fall back into its usual habits, rewarding reputation instead of performance? That's the tension. That's the question hanging over all of this. And maybe that's why, even with everything these players have done, you still feel that doubt lingering in the back of your mind. But one thing is obvious. If the Pro Bowl were truly about deserving players, all 5 of them would hear their names called without hesitation.